you ever said something completely normal and then spent the next 3 hours replaying it in your head? You're in a conversation. You laugh. You share a story. You speak up. It feels fine in the moment. Natural, unfiltered. You're just being. And then later, maybe in the car, maybe in the shower, maybe lying in bed, it hits. That small wave, that tightening in your stomach, that thought, why did I say that? Why did I laugh like that? Why was I so much? And suddenly, something that was innocent becomes evidence against you. You replay the tone of your voice, the way your face looked, the timing of the joke, the pause after your opinion. You reconstruct the entire interaction as if it were a crime scene, not because anything actually happened, but because something inside you decided you might have stepped outside the invisible lines. Most people have done this. Almost everyone, actually. They just don't talk about it. They carry it quietly. And what's interesting is this: the embarrassment rarely shows up when you lie. It rarely shows up when you're guarded. It doesn't usually flare when you're being calculated. It shows up when you were real, when you were enthusiastic, when you were vulnerable, when you forgot to monitor yourself. There's a particular kind of embarrassment that doesn't feel like, I did something wrong. It feels like I was too visible. And that's different, because doing something wrong can be corrected. But feeling like your natural self is wrong, that's heavier. That's the kind that lingers. Maybe you've noticed it in small ways. You send a message and then immediately wish you hadn't been so open. You post something honest and then consider deleting it. You tell a story and later think, why did I share that? And what makes it confusing is that no one else may have reacted negatively. No one called you out. No one mocked you. The room didn't fall silent. The reaction came from inside. It's like there's a quiet internal editor who wakes up after the fact and says, that was risky. Risky to be expressive, risky to be animated, risky to be seen, and so the body responds the way it always does to risk. Heat rises in the face, the chest tightens slightly. There's a flicker of self-correction. Embarrassment isn't just a thought, it's physical. It moves through you. And here's the question that almost no one pauses to ask. Why does being fully yourself sometimes feel unsafe? Not dramatic unsafe, not danger unsafe, but socially unsafe. Why does your system react as if you crossed a boundary when all you did was exist without shrinking? Some people learn early that standing out invites attention, and attention can invite judgment, and judgment can invite distance. So the mind develops a habit. After you express yourself, it scans for threat. It reviews the footage. It checks. Did we overshare? Were we too loud? Did we reveal too much joy? Too much opinion? Too much intensity? And the strange thing is, the more authentic you were in the moment, the stronger the scan can be afterwards. Because authenticity means you drop the mask. And dropping the mask feels exposed. You might not consciously think, I'm not allowed to be like this. But your body might still carry the memory of times when it didn't go well. When enthusiasm was labeled dramatic. When sensitivity was labeled weakness. When curiosity was labeled annoying. When confidence was labeled arrogance. Those little labels stick. Not as loud beliefs, but as quiet flinches. And so now, years later, you can be sitting in your own home, replaying a completely ordinary conversation, feeling that flush of embarrassment, and not even know why. Nothing catastrophic happened. You were just visible. And somewhere along the way, visible became associated with vulnerable. So the embarrassment isn't random. It isn't proof that you're awkward or socially incompetent. It might just be an old protection system checking in, asking, are we safe to be that open? And maybe the most important thing to realize is this. The feeling itself doesn't mean you did anything wrong. It means your nervous system noticed exposure. That's all. Not guilt, not failure, exposure. And exposure only feels dangerous if, at some point, it was. So before we judge the embarrassment, before we tell ourselves to just be more confident, it might be worth understanding where that reflex came from. Because the story didn't start in adulthood. It started much earlier. And that's where we'll go next. Where it began. No one wakes up one day at 30 or 40 and randomly decides that being themselves is embarrassing. That reflex is learned. Not in one dramatic moment, not usually in a single big event. It's formed in the small, almost forgettable interactions that shape how we understand belonging. Think about being a child for a second. You laugh loudly at something you find hilarious. A grown-up says, shh, don't be so loud. You cry because something genuinely hurt your feelings. Someone responds, you're too sensitive. You're excited about an idea. You talk fast, animated, alive. A teacher says, calm down. You're being disruptive. None of those moments are catastrophic. They're ordinary. They're common. Most people experience some version of them, but the body doesn't measure events by how dramatic they are. It measures them by whether connection stayed intact. As children, our entire nervous system is wired around one primary need: stay connected, stay included, stay safe within the group. If a moment of self-expression is followed by correction, laughter, dismissal, or subtle withdrawal, the body notices, not consciously, not as a clear sentence, but as sensation, expression, tension in the room, authenticity, disapproval, excitement, someone pulling back, and the system quietly stores that association. It doesn't think, "I must never laugh again." It thinks, "Let's be a little smaller next time." That's how it begins. Micro adjustments. You soften your voice. You check people's faces before finishing a sentence. You become very good at reading the room. And this is where it gets interesting. Many people who struggle with embarrassment later in life are highly attuned, emotionally intelligent, socially aware. They can sense subtle shifts in tone, posture, energy. That didn't happen by accident. It often developed as a survival skill. When you grow up needing to monitor reactions, you become excellent at detecting them. But there's a cost. You begin to monitor yourself just as closely. So now, as an adult, you don't even need someone else to correct you. You correct yourself before anyone else can. That wave of embarrassment after being real? It's often just the old monitoring system activating. It's the body saying, "We felt exposed." Let's review, and here's the part that's rarely acknowledged. Embarrassment isn't always about shame. Sometimes it's about attachment, about the deep biological need to stay accepted. Your brain is social. It evolved in tribes, in small groups where being rejected could mean literal danger. So even today, in a completely safe environment, your nervous system can still treat mild social vulnerability as threat. A raised eyebrow, a delayed reply, a neutral expression. The system fills in the blanks. It doesn't ask, what are the 15 rational explanations for that reaction? It asks, did we just risk losing connection? And if the answer feels uncertain, the flush comes. Heat, tightness, replay. Not because you are wrong, but because connection matters that much. Now imagine layering that with repeated subtle messaging growing up. Don't show off. Don't be weird. Don't draw attention. Tone it down. Even if those phrases were said casually, even if they were meant kindly, they shape the perimeter of who you think you're allowed to be. So you internalize the perimeter, you start to anticipate where the invisible fence might be. And when you accidentally step over it, by laughing too freely, speaking too passionately, being too honest, embarrassment acts like the electric buzz, a reminder. Except here's the truth that changes everything. The fence may not even exist anymore. You might be in rooms now where your laughter is welcome, in conversations where your honesty is refreshing, among people who find your intensity magnetic. But the nervous system doesn't update automatically. It still runs old code. And that old code says visibility equals risk. So when you feel that embarrassment after being fully yourself, it might not be about the present at all. It might be a memory response, a stored pattern firing on cue. And when you understand that, something softens. Because instead of attacking yourself, why am I like this? Why can't I just be confident? You can begin to see it as a younger version of you trying to keep connection intact, trying to keep you safe. That younger version wasn't weak. They were adaptive. They learned quickly. They paid attention. They adjusted so they could stay loved. And that deserves compassion, not criticism. But here's the quiet shift. If embarrassment was learned in relationship, it can be unlearned in relationship too. And that begins with noticing how it still shows up now. Not in childhood classrooms, but in adult conversations, in texts, in posts, in meetings, in quiet moments after you've let yourself shine a little. And that's where we're going next. The echo in adulthood. So now you're not a child anymore. You're grown. You pay bills. You've lived enough life to know who you are, at least in theory. And yet, you still sometimes send a message and immediately wish you'd been cooler. You still replay conversations. You still feel that small, internal wince after laughing too freely or speaking too passionately. It's subtle. It doesn't take over your life, but it's there. The echo. What's fascinating is how quickly it happens. You'll be completely natural in the moment, talking, sharing, being animated, maybe even proud of yourself for not overthinking. And then later, alone, your body shifts. It's almost like an aftershock. Did I come across as too much? Too eager? Too opinionated? Too intense? Too emotional? That word, too, tends to appear a lot. And notice how it isn't usually about cruelty or dishonesty or wrongdoing. It's about magnitude. You were too visible, too bright, too honest. Somewhere along the way, you learned that shrinking slightly kept things smoother. So now, even in safe environments, the system runs a quiet review. The mind becomes a playback machine. You examine tone, facial expressions, timing, silences. You zoom in on tiny details no one else would even remember. And here's something almost tender about it. You're not trying to criticize yourself. You're trying to prevent rejection. The internal replay isn't self-hatred. It's preemptive protection. If we catch the mistake first, we can fix it. Except often, there wasn't a mistake. You were just unfiltered. You were just alive in the moment. But when you're used to monitoring yourself, authenticity can feel like a lapse in control. It's almost as if you stepped outside the carefully edited version of yourself. The version that is measured, balanced, acceptable. And the embarrassment says, that was risky. Sometimes it shows up in tiny ways. You downplay your success immediately after sharing it. You laugh at yourself before anyone else can. You add, I know that sounds stupid, even when it doesn't. You shrink the impact of what you just said. It's subtle self-editing. And what's painful is that many people don't even realize they're doing it. It feels normal. It feels responsible. It feels humble. But underneath it is a fear that if you stand fully in what you think, feel, or are, someone might withdraw. And if you've ever experienced that withdrawal before, even once in a meaningful way, the body remembers. It doesn't matter that you're in a different room now. It doesn't matter that you're surrounded by different people. The nervous system doesn't operate on logic alone. It operates on pattern recognition. Expression followed by discomfort equals caution next time. So even in adulthood, you may find yourself softening your edges. You might soften your enthusiasm so it's more palatable. You might temper your opinions so they don't rock anything. You might present yourself in a way that is safe, but not entirely true. And then occasionally, you forget to do that. You laugh big. You speak with conviction. You reveal something vulnerable. And afterwards, the embarrassment arrives like a gentle but insistent tap on the shoulder. Careful. What if, instead of interpreting that tap as evidence you were wrong, you began to see it as habit? A deeply ingrained reflex. A system that once kept you connected, still trying to do its job. Because here's something quietly empowering. If embarrassment is a reflex, it is not an identity. It doesn't define you. It doesn't mean you are socially awkward or incapable or foolish. It means your system learned to equate visibility with evaluation, and that can be softened. But only if you stop fighting it long enough to understand it. Instead of saying, why am I like this? What if you asked, when did I first learn that being fully myself required review? That question isn't about blame. It's about context. Because the adult you today may actually be in rooms where your fullness is welcome, where your passion is refreshing, where your laugh is infectious. But if your body still expects correction, it will brace for it. And bracing feels a lot like embarrassment. Now imagine something different for a moment. Imagine expressing yourself, and when the afterthought comes, instead of spiraling into replay, you simply notice it. You feel the heat rise slightly. You feel the old reflex wanting to review, and you gently say, thank you. I'm safe. You don't delete the message. You don't retract the story. You don't apologize for the volume of your joy. You let the moment stand. That is where the pattern begins to shift. Not in dramatic declarations, but in quiet tolerance of your own visibility. And that's where we move next, into what this embarrassment really is at a deeper level, and why it doesn't mean what you think it means. The alarm that stayed switched on. There's something almost innocent about embarrassment when you really look at it. It feels harsh when it hits you, yes. It can feel sharp, but at its core, it's just an alarm. And alarms aren't villains. They're protectors. The problem isn't that the alarm exists. The problem is when it stays switched on long after the fire is gone. Your nervous system doesn't just respond to physical danger. It responds to social exposure. And in a world where visibility is constant, conversations, messages, social media, group dynamics, exposure happens a lot. You don't just live in a village of 20 people anymore. You live in a digital amphitheater. Every opinion can be commented on. Every post can be evaluated. Every tone can be misread. So the system adapts. It becomes vigilant. But here's the part that most people miss. Your nervous system doesn't actually know the difference between mild social discomfort and true rejection. It reads both as potential threat A slightly awkward silence? Threat signal. Someone not responding with the energy you expected? Threat signal. A neutral face when you were excited? Threat signal. The body responds before the mind has time to reason. Heat, tightness, that small urge to retreat. And because we live in a culture that is constantly observing, rating, reacting, the alarm gets reinforced. Think about how quickly people are judged online, how easily enthusiasm is labeled cringe, how often vulnerability is met with sarcasm. You don't even need to experience it directly. You see it happen to others. And the body takes notes. Visibility equals risk. So even if your personal world is kind, even if your immediate circle is supportive, the broader atmosphere can still whisper caution. And then there's something deeper. Not all of us were encouraged to take up space. Some people grew up in homes where calm was valued over expression, where being easy was praised more than being honest, where peace meant quiet compliance. So stepping into full authenticity can feel like stepping onto thin ice. You're not just being yourself, you're defying an old agreement. An agreement that said, stay manageable. That's why embarrassment sometimes feels disproportionate. You say one animated sentence and the internal response feels huge, because it's not reacting to the sentence. It's reacting to the idea of stepping beyond the old perimeter. And here's something quietly empowering. Embarrassment is not proof that you overstepped. It is proof that your system noticed change. Change in visibility, change in energy, change in how much space you took up. That's not weakness, that's awareness. But awareness doesn't have to mean retreat. The alarm can ring without you evacuating the building. You can feel the flush and stay. You can notice the urge to retract and let the word stand. You can experience the old reflex without obeying it. Because here's the truth that shifts everything. Not every alarm is current. Some are echoes, old settings running in new environments. You are not in the same classrooms. You are not in the same dynamics. You are not the same version of yourself who once needed to shrink to survive. But your nervous system might still be operating as if you are. And when you see that, really see it, something softens. Embarrassment stops feeling like evidence of failure. It starts feeling like an outdated notification, a reminder from a past chapter. And instead of fighting it, or shaming yourself for feeling it, you can meet it gently. Almost like you would a child who's worried they've done something wrong. You wouldn't shout at them. You wouldn't tell them to toughen up. You'd say, you're okay. Nothing bad happened. You can do the same for yourself. Because the goal isn't to eliminate embarrassment completely. It's to stop letting it decide who you're allowed to be. And when you begin to stay present through that discomfort, even just 1 second longer than before, something powerful happens. The system recalibrates. It realizes that visibility didn't lead to abandonment. That authenticity didn't collapse connection. That taking up space didn't end in exile. And slowly, the alarm learns it doesn't need to be so loud. Which brings us to something gentle and freeing. What happens when you stop apologizing for existing exactly as you are? That's where we land this. Staying visible. Imagine this for a moment. You say something in a conversation. You feel that familiar flicker afterwards, that small internal check, the heat, the urge to rewind. And instead of spiraling, you pause, not to analyze, not to correct, just to stay. You let the moment exist without editing it. That's where the shift begins. Because the goal was never to become someone who feels zero embarrassment. That's not human. The goal is to stop interpreting embarrassment as proof that you were wrong. What if the flush in your face isn't a verdict, but a memory? What if that tightness in your chest is simply an old part of you asking, are we safe? And instead of answering with retreat, you answer with steadiness. Yes, we are. There is something profoundly powerful about not retracting yourself, not shrinking your laugh after it's already filled the room, not softening your opinion after you've spoken it clearly, not adding disclaimers to your joy. It doesn't require drama. It doesn't require bold declarations. It can be quiet. You just don't apologize for being there. And I think this is where a lot of people misunderstand confidence. Confidence isn't loud. It isn't dominating. It isn't fearless. Sometimes confidence is simply tolerating the sensation of being seen, letting the aftershock pass without dismantling yourself. Because that's what embarrassment often tries to do. It invites you to dismantle, to trim, to reduce. But your fullness isn't an error. Your enthusiasm isn't a flaw. Your emotional range isn't a liability. The parts of you that feel too much are often just the parts that were once too visible in the wrong rooms. And maybe now, you're not in those rooms anymore. Maybe now you are surrounded by people who actually appreciate depth, warmth, energy, thoughtfulness. But if you're still operating from the old blueprint, you'll shrink automatically. So here's something gentle to try. The next time you feel embarrassed after being yourself, don't argue with it. Don't push it away. Just notice it. Feel the warmth in your skin. Feel the slight urge to retract. And instead of following it, breathe. Stay 1 second longer. Let the message stay sent. Let the story stay told. Let the laugh echo without trimming it down. That single second of staying is rewiring. It tells your system, we can survive visibility. And over time, that second becomes 2, then 5. Then a full moment of calm where the replay never even starts. You won't wake up one day transformed into someone who never self-reflects. That's not the point. You'll just wake up one day and realize you no longer feel the need to apologize for the shape of your personality. And that is quiet freedom, not dramatic, not performative, just steady, because maybe the most radical thing you can do in a world that constantly evaluates, comments, and categorizes is remain whole, unedited, unshrunk, unapologetic in the softest way, not aggressive, not defiant, just present. You were never too much. You were just adjusting to environments that didn't know what to do with your light. And now, you don't have to dim it to stay connected. You can be warm and visible, gentle and expressive, soft and powerful at the same time. And if a flicker of embarrassment still visits from time to time, that's okay. It's just an old alarm checking in. You don't have to evacuate anymore. You can stay, you can be seen, and you can trust that the right rooms won't punish you for shining in them. As always, this has been Valkyrie. Thanks for stopping by. Until next time, be kind to yourself and others. Lanterns up, people.